There are places in Asia where the dead are not at peace, where old prayers were once whispered by monks who no longer exist, and the scent of burning incense lingers long after the ashes have turned cold. Welcome to Whispers of Asia, where every story is a haunting echo of those who were never meant to be forgotten. In this tale, we follow a young woman into the heart of northern Thailand, where a ruined temple stands hidden beneath strangler fig and silence, a place once sacred, now cursed, where a forbidden funeral rite, known only as the ninth ash, trapped a vengeful soul inside a prayer amulet and buried it beneath a bell that hasn't tolled in decades. But some rituals do not stay buried, and some spirits do not rest. This is not just a ghost story. It is a story of ashes, silence, and what happens when you disturb the prayers the dead never wanted found. Janya had always hated the sound of temple gongs, not because they were loud, but because they were final. In her village, gongs tolled not for worship, but for death. 3 slow chimes, 1 breath between each, and then the silence that followed, heavier than the sound itself. She heard them again the morning they burned her grandmother. It was early. Mist curled around the thatched roofs like thin smoke, and the banana leaves were still dripping from the night's quiet rain. Janya stood barefoot on the damp earth, arms folded tightly as if holding herself together. Villagers passed her with lotus bundles and solemn nods. They whispered prayers under their breath, but none of them met her eyes. Her grandmother, Mai Peng, had not died peacefully. The old woman had collapsed in her sleep, lips cracked, hands clenched, as if choking on something unseen. The temple boys who found her said there was ash under her fingernails, no fire in the room, no incense lit. Yet when they moved the body, a faint scorch mark remained on the mat. No one talked about it. They simply said she was old. Her time had come. But Janya knew better. The funeral was brief. Monks chanted over her body, wrapped tightly in white linen and placed atop a wood pyre behind the temple. The abbot, a man with trembling hands, seemed to avoid looking at the body at all. When he lit the flame, the wind, which had been still all morning, suddenly howled through the trees, bending the bamboo groves in a bow. The villagers took it as a blessing. Janya felt only dread. She stayed behind after the others had gone, watching the last curls of smoke dissolve into the pale morning. Alone, she walked around the now smoldering site, drawn not by grief, but by something else, something she couldn't name. It was then she noticed the chest, a blackened, soot-stained wooden box half buried behind the cremation platform. It hadn't been there before. No one else had seen it, but now, in the hush that followed death, it stood out like a whisper in a prayer. Janya hesitated. Every instinct told her to leave it, but she didn't. She knelt and pulled it free with both hands. The wood was warm, too warm, not from the sun, not from the fire, but from something within. The lid bore no lock, only a strip of faded red cloth knotted tightly around its middle, knotted 9 times, as if to keep something in. She took it home. Back in her small wooden house at the edge of the village, she placed the chest on the bamboo floor. She stared at it for a long while. The shadows grew. The cicadas began their evening cry. And finally, she untied the knot. Inside was not much. A single scroll wrapped in black prayer cloth, a string of old prayer beads broken in half, a strip of crimson wax cracked down the center, and beneath it all, a diary. Not a printed book, not even bound, just a series of brittle, yellowed pages, hand-stitched together with thread the color of dried blood. The cover was blank, but the first page bore a name, Pra Ajahn Narin, a monk, long dead judging by the state of the paper. The name meant nothing to her, but the words below it did. Do not burn the 9th ash. Do not chant his name. Do not open the bell. Janya blinked. Her breath caught. A strange chill crawled up the back of her neck. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Like hearing the first 3 notes of a lullaby she'd forgotten, but somehow still remembered. She read on. The handwriting was delicate, flowing like the ink of someone who prayed more than they spoke. The monk wrote of a hidden temple, Wat Sangkhaen, a name unfamiliar, yet oddly heavy. He spoke of a ritual called the 9th ash, a funerary rite banned by the Sangha centuries ago, meant to cleanse the soul of those who died with hatred still burning in their hearts. 9 ashes, he said, for 9 breaths of vengeance. 8 were scattered, the 9th was bound, and it was never supposed to be touched again. But the ritual was incomplete. The ash had not dissolved, the soul had not passed, and now something remained behind, something still waiting. The entries grew more erratic. The monk began to describe dreams, a figure wrapped in fireless smoke, bells that tolled with no hands, Bodhi leaves that bled, a man who had no face, only ash where his eyes should be. The last entry was barely legible. I have sealed it in the prayer bell beneath the Bodhi tree. I have used wax and blood and red string, but I fear it calls still. The 9th ash does not forgive. It remembers, and it wants a body. Janya closed the diary. The air in the room felt too thick. The candle on her shelf flickered, though there was no wind. And from outside, far in the night, a sound she hadn't heard since morning. A gong. 3 soft chimes, faint, as if heard through a dream. Then silence. Her grandmother had never spoken of monks, never mentioned temples. She was an herbalist, quiet, sharp-eyed, stubborn. But when she was small, she remembered one thing. Her grandmother used to mutter in her sleep. The same 3 words, over and over. Don't open the bell. At the time, she had thought it nonsense. Now, she wasn't so sure. That night, sleep did not come easily. She lay beneath the mosquito net, the diary on her chest, the red string coiled beside her like a sleeping snake. Outside, the crickets sang. The wind passed through the banana leaves in whispers. And just for a moment, as her eyes began to drift, she thought she saw movement in the dark corner of her room. Not a figure, a flicker, a shimmer, like heat rising from the floor. And just before sleep claimed her, she heard something else. A voice, not loud, not angry, just there, right next to her ear. He never crossed over.
For 3 nights after the funeral, Janya did not dream, or rather, she did not remember the dreams. Each morning she woke with the same dull ache behind her eyes, the taste of ash on her tongue, and the faint scent of incense that was never lit. Her room felt heavier, as though the air itself had turned to smoke. She told herself it was grief. The human mind could invent anything to make sense of loss. But this felt different, less like sadness and more like presence. The diary stayed by her bedside, its black cover slowly absorbing the candle soot that drifted in the night air. Sometimes when she turned away, she thought she heard the faint rustle of pages. Once, she swore she saw a bead of melted wax drip upward along the spine. Her father noticed her restlessness. He was a quiet man, stooped from years of fieldwork, his hands always smelling faintly of soil and lemongrass. That morning, he set down his bowl of rice and looked at her across the table. "You shouldn't keep her things," he said simply. Janya froze. "What things?" "The box you brought home," he murmured, eyes still lowered. "That chest was meant to burn with her. You should not have touched it." There was something in his tone she had never heard before. Fear. Not anger, not authority, but the trembling unease of someone remembering a wound that never healed. She waited for him to say more, but he didn't. He just stood, washed his bowl, and went outside. That night, the paralysis came. It began as a weight on her chest, light at first, then growing heavier until she could no longer draw breath. Her eyes opened, but her body would not move. The candle beside her had gone out, yet the air shimmered faintly, as though lit from somewhere behind the walls. Something stood in the corner. A figure in tattered monk's robes, its back to her, whispering words she could not understand. The voice sounded wet, like water poured over ash, and with each whisper, the room grew colder. The thing turned. Its face was hidden beneath a black cowl, but its hands, folded in prayer, were gray and blistered, the skin cracked open like dried clay. It raised one hand toward her, palm marked with a circular burn. Then it spoke. "Ash before fire, fire before silence." The voice was not one voice. It was many, men, women, old and young, all speaking through the same broken breath. Janya wanted to scream, but her mouth wouldn't move. The candle flickered back to life, though no one had touched it. The flame was black. "He never crossed over," the voices murmured again. "Finish what she began." The weight lifted. Her body jolted upright, drenched in sweat. The candle was normal again. The corner was empty, but her chest burned where the figure had pointed, a faint circular mark, like a scorch the size of a coin. The next morning, she went to the temple. The abbot greeted her with polite confusion. "Child, the mourning period isn't over. What brings you back?" She hesitated, unsure how to explain what she'd seen. "I found something after the cremation, a diary. It mentioned a monk, Naren. Do you know that name?" The old man's smile faltered. "Naren?" he repeated quietly. "Where did you hear that name?" "From my grandmother's things. It was in a chest behind the pyre." The abbot's eyes flicked toward the prayer hall, then back to her. His voice dropped to a whisper. "That name should not be spoken in this temple." Janya frowned. "Why?" He hesitated. Then, as if weighed down by memory, he said, "Because Pra Ajahn Naren was erased from the Sangha nearly 60 years ago. His ashes were never sanctified. His spirit was declared tainted." She stared. "Tainted? How? The abbot's hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his robe. He broke the law of compassion. During a funerary rite, he tried to trap a man's soul, to purify it, he said. But he used the wrong chants. He bound the spirit instead. The temple where it happened burned a year later. No monk has spoken his name since. Wat Sangkhaen, the name from the diary. Where was this temple? She asked. He looked away. It no longer exists. Please, she pressed. I need to know. His silence stretched long enough to become a refusal. Then he simply said, "Some places die. Let them stay dead." That night, she could not rest. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the diary open beside her. Her chest still ached faintly where the burn mark had formed, like a bruise under the skin. The air felt heavy again, but she had lit no incense this time. She began reading from where she had left off. On the night of the 9th ash, the soul screamed until dawn. The bell cracked. I sealed it again, but the chant was not finished. Without the 9th breath, the spirit remains, half in this world, half beneath. Beneath what? Janya turned the page. Another line appeared, barely legible through smudged ink. The bloodline of the uncremated will carry the voice. She froze. The candle beside her flickered again, though the windows were shut. Bloodline, she whispered. Her grandmother's fingernails blackened with ash. Her father's sudden fear. The scorch mark on the mat. Something connected.
She reached for the prayer beads. Half of them were broken, but one bead remained intact, deep brown, smooth with age. She lifted it close to the candlelight. There was something etched into its surface, a tiny symbol, a bell, and beneath it a name, Narin. Her hands began to tremble. The candlelight wavered, stretching shadows across the walls like smoke fingers. And then she heard it again, this time not in a dream, not in paralysis, but wide awake. A whisper, low and near, coming from the floorboards beneath her. It wasn't words at first, but a faint rhythmic hum, like chanting underwater. Then slowly it formed syllables. Wat Sangkhaen, Wat Sangkhaen. Janya dropped the bead. The whisper stopped. The silence that followed was complete. Then came a single tap from beneath the floor. Once, twice, 3 times, like a monk's staff striking the temple stones. She stood quickly, her breath shallow. Every instinct screamed to leave the room, to run outside, to wake her father, but she couldn't. Something pulled her gaze downward. The bamboo mat beneath her feet had begun to darken. A faint gray dust seeped through the cracks between the slats, rising like smoke. She knelt, reached out. Ash. It smelled faintly of old incense and rain. As she lifted her hand, the ash swirled against her skin, forming a shape, a circle, a bell. Then it scattered. By dawn, she had made her decision. If her grandmother's death had awakened something, if this diary had been meant for her to find, then she needed to know why. She packed a small bag with rice, a flashlight, and the diary wrapped in cloth. Her father was already in the fields when she left. He did not see her slip past the edge of the village, following the trail toward the northern hills where the forest began. The same forest her grandmother had always forbidden her to enter. The
The sun barely pierced the canopy. Vines hung low, tangled with old paper talismans, faded to gray. She walked for hours, following half-remembered paths, listening to the soft thrum of cicadas and something else, something like distant chanting, carried by no wind. When she stopped to rest, she unfolded the diary and studied the map sketched on the final pages. A simple drawing, river, hill, and a circle marked with a single word, Sangkhaen. The forest grew darker. By afternoon, the air had turned cool and still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She passed an abandoned shrine, its guardian statues decapitated, their faces eroded with moss. Someone had left fresh flowers there, white jasmine, still moist with dew. Someone else had been here, recently. Her pulse quickened. A bell sounded far off in the distance. One toll, then another, then another. The same rhythm from the whisper. 3 times. The wind rose, swirling ash from the forest floor, and for a brief moment she thought she saw a shape between the trees, cloaked in gray, head bowed, holding something that glimmered like molten gold. Then it was gone. Night found her before she found the temple. She built a small fire near a clearing, unrolled her mat, and opened the diary again. The ink shimmered faintly under the firelight, as if written in something other than ink. Those who disturb the 9th ash will see the monk without eyes. She closed it. The fire crackled softly. The forest around her was still. Too still. Even the cicadas had gone silent. Then, in the distance, faint, deliberate, the sound of footsteps on leaves, slow, dragging. Her breath caught. The firelight flickered. Someone was standing just beyond the circle of light, tall, motionless, watching. The same faint scent of burned incense drifted through the trees. When she blinked, it was gone. But in its place, on the ground before her mat, lay a single object, a prayer bead, old, brown, smooth, identical to the one she had dropped at home.
Morning crept over the forest in a gray hush. Mist still clung to the rice paddies, the world muted as if wrapped in wet silk. Janya walked home before anyone noticed she had been gone all night. Her clothes were damp, her palms black with soot from the fire that had died while she slept. She slipped through the side door and laid the broken prayer bead on her table. The mark on her chest still throbbed faintly, an ember under skin. The diary waited. She unwrapped it from its cloth and turned to the last few pages again. There, between 2 paragraphs of prayer notation, was a rough sketch drawn in hurried lines. A winding river, a cluster of hills, a circle marked with the word Sangkhaen. Around the edge, someone had written a single line in Pali, "Where the bell tolls, but the wind does not." She traced the route with one finger. It followed a river she knew, Mei Ping, but the bend, the hills, the final mark, they shouldn't exist. That area had been flooded decades ago when the dam was built. The map pointed straight into the reservoir. Her father's cough broke the silence. He stood in the doorway, his face pale beneath the morning light. "You went out last night." It wasn't a question. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. He looked at the diary on the table, the open pages full of ink and warnings. "You're walking where your grandmother already sinned." Janya frowned. What sin? She was part of it. The monk, the fire. They said she carried one of his relics home to hide it from the Sangha. When the temple burned, people said his spirit followed her. He reached out, almost touching the diary, then drew his hand back quickly. "Burn it, before it remembers you." She didn't.
That afternoon, she took the book to the university library in Chiang Mai. The librarians were used to her, quiet girl, always asking about forgotten temples and forest monks. But when she laid the pages before the history professor, he squinted and shook his head. There's no Wat Sangkhaen on record. Not in this province, not anywhere. But the diary, he interrupted gently. Every region has its ghost temples, ones that never existed, yet villagers swear they once stood. Usually they mark old cremation sites. You do well to leave it there. Janya thanked him, but as she left the building, something caught her eye. In a glass case near the stairwell, beneath the dust of decades, lay a fragment of temple cloth, a scrap of black cotton printed with faint gold script. The label read, "Recovered from the ruins of Wat Sangkhaen, circa 1957. Her pulse quickened. She leaned closer. The fabric bore a small circular emblem at the corner, a bell surrounded by 9 strokes of flame, the same as the one carved on the bead. So it had existed. She copied the coordinates from an old cadastral survey in the archive and overlaid them onto a modern map. The temple's location matched a patch of forest at the edge of the reservoir where the waterline had receded during the drought. By dusk, she was already packing. The bus dropped her at a roadside village that smelled of rain and gasoline. Children watched her from doorways as she passed, their eyes dark with quiet curiosity. At a roadside stall, an old woman sold her bottled water and sticky rice wrapped in banana leaf. When she mentioned the old temple by name, the woman's smile vanished. "Don't go there. That place is for monks without eyes." The words froze her mid-step. "Without eyes?" She crossed herself the old way, thumb pressed to forehead, heart, throat. "They said he took his own eyes to keep from seeing the fire he called." I tried to laugh, but the sound came hollow. "It's just a story." The woman looked past her, toward the darkening line of trees. All stories begin with someone who didn't listen. She started walking before the last light faded. The forest road narrowed to a dirt trail, then to nothing at all. The air grew damp, heavy with the smell of wet bark and earth. Somewhere ahead, frogs croaked in slow rhythm, and beneath them a distant clang, the echo of a bell carried over water. Each step took her deeper into the kind of silence that doesn't simply lack sound, but seems to swallow it. She followed the map's crude lines, turning where the ink suggested bends in the river that no longer existed. And yet, as she walked, she began to hear flowing water to her left, a low, steady murmur, impossible this far from the reservoir. At last, the trees opened onto a ravine. A trickle of river cut through its base, shimmering silver in the dying light. On the opposite bank rose a hill shaped like a bell, its slope overgrown with strangler figs. At the top, half hidden in vines, something glinted. Stone. She climbed. Roots snagged her ankles, thorns tore her sleeves. When she reached the crest, she found a single stone stairway descending into the earth. Broken prayer flags hung limp above it. The first step was carved with faint Pali script, worn nearly smooth by time. "This way to silence." She hesitated only a moment before descending. The stairway ended in a chamber half filled with water. Her flashlight beam cut across stone pillars, wrapped in offerings of red string, long decayed. Bats clung to the ceiling like black petals. On the far wall, above an altar eaten by moss, stood a cracked image of the Buddha, eyes covered with a band of plaster. Beneath it, etched into the wall, was the same circle and bell symbol she had seen on the cloth. She stepped closer. The air smelled faintly of burned wood. Something fluttered near her feet, paper, disintegrating. She lifted it carefully. It was a fragment of scripture, and on its back someone had scrawled a note in Thai. "Do not ring. The sound wakes him." She lowered the light. Behind the altar, half submerged, she saw it, a bronze bell, green with age, half sunk in mud. Its surface was sealed in wax, and from its lip hung dozens of red strings, each knotted 9 times. Her grandmother's knots. Janya's breath trembled. The urge to touch it was overwhelming, the same way a wound begs to be pressed. She reached out and stopped. The air had shifted. The surface of the water rippled, though nothing had moved. A faint vibration filled the chamber, like the deep hum of a temple drum heard from miles away. Then, beneath the water, she saw something pale drift between her feet. A hand. She stumbled back, the beam flashing wildly across the walls. The hand sank again, leaving only a swirl of ash in the water. Her own reflection wavered, and another face appeared beside it. Shaven head, gray skin, empty sockets where eyes should be. She fled up the stairs before her scream could echo. Outside, the forest was utterly still. The night had thickened, the moon veiled in smoke. She stumbled down the slope and didn't stop until she reached the riverbed. When she looked back, the hill was nothing but shadow. Yet faintly, impossibly, she heard the low toll of a bell. Once, twice, 3 times. She pressed her hands over her ears. The sound kept coming, not through the air, but through her bones. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Only the whisper of leaves remained. She fell to her knees, trembling, gasping for air. And when she opened her hand, she found something clutched tight in her fist, a scrap of black cloth, damp and warm, printed with a single gold word: return.
Janya woke before dawn, her body stiff from sleeping on the riverbank. A gray light spread through the forest like water spilled over glass. The bell's echo still clung to her ears, faint but unbroken, a memory that refused to fade. The scrap of cloth she had found in her palm was gone. Only the smell remained, that same faint, metallic sweetness of burned incense. She sat up slowly. The forest was motionless. No rustle of birds, no breath of wind, not even the distant croak of frogs. The silence pressed against her like a held breath. And yet, beneath it, something pulsed. A rhythm, faint but alive, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. She began walking. The path she followed wasn't visible so much as felt, the way the light dimmed between the trees, the way the air cooled when she stepped in the right direction. It led her deeper into the old growth, past moss-covered stupas half swallowed by roots, past stone carvings of deities whose faces had eroded into blank, watching masks. Every so often she passed a thread of red string hanging from a branch, its knots untouched by time. Each one carried a wax seal pressed with a small bell symbol. The same mark again and again, as if the forest itself had been bound by unseen hands. The diary's words echoed in her mind. Do not burn the 9th ash. Do not chant his name. Do not open the bell. And yet she had seen it, touched its air, heard its voice. By noon she found the remnants of a path paved with broken tiles. They shimmered with traces of gold leaf. Monks must have walked here once, long ago. At the path's center stood a Bodhi tree, its trunk enormous, its roots gripping the earth like 100 gray serpents. The windless air felt thicker here. The leaves did not move, not one. At the base of the tree lay offerings, ancient, desiccated, a bowl of salt, a small mirror cracked down the middle, 9 candles burned halfway through, and in the center a small clay urn sealed with wax. She knelt.
The wax had melted in the heat, revealing faint symbols carved beneath, circular strokes that resembled eyes, or maybe bells. When she leaned closer, she heard it again, a whisper, soft, patient, as though waiting for her to answer. "You carry the 9th." Her blood ran cold. The whisper did not come from the urn. It came from the ground beneath it. She took a step back. The earth under her foot shifted, not like soil, but like skin, a hollow space. Crouching, she brushed away the dust and found a narrow slit in the ground. Air rose from it, warm, damp, scented faintly of smoke. A tunnel. Her pulse thundered. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to walk toward the sunlight and forget everything she had seen. But she couldn't. The whisper was pulling her now, steady as breath. She lit her flashlight and descended. The air grew warm the deeper she went, almost suffocating. The tunnel walls were lined with clay tiles etched with names, each blackened by smoke. Occasionally, she saw words scratched in haste, like someone had tried to escape by writing. "He still breathes. Do not light fire. The ash remembers." The passage opened into a narrow chamber filled with the remains of burned candles. The air shimmered. For a moment she thought she saw heat rising, though no flame burned. In the chamber's center stood a wooden altar blackened by soot. On it sat a monk's begging bowl, cracked but still whole. Inside lay fine gray powder, ash, and something glinting faintly within it. A tooth. Janya stared. It was polished, almost golden, as if the fire had purified it rather than destroyed it. Around the bowl, wax had been poured into patterns of circles and loops, all connected by a line leading to a small clay bell fused to the floor. She crouched closer, studying the formation. And then she heard breathing. Not hers. Slow, wet, coming from behind the altar. She swung the flashlight around. The beam caught a shape in the far corner. A small figure wrapped in cloth, knees drawn to chest, head bowed low. For a heartbeat, she thought it was a statue. Then it exhaled. The sound was like air through ashes. "Who's there?" she whispered. The figure did not answer. It shifted slightly, the cloth slipping to reveal a thin shoulder, human. She took a cautious step forward. The beam touched its face, or what was left of one. Hollow sockets stared back, empty but aware. The mouth moved, whispering without sound. She stumbled backward, the flashlight shaking. The figure raised one trembling hand and pointed toward the altar bowl. Then its head collapsed forward into dust. The whisper that followed seemed to rise from the walls themselves. "Return the ash." Her body moved before thought. She seized the diary from her bag and flipped through the pages. Near the end, in the monk's slanted handwriting, a final note appeared that she had never seen before. "If the wind does not blow, you are beneath his breath. Leave before the silence breaks." She turned to flee, but the tunnel behind her was gone. Only darkness remained, thick as tar. She ran anyway. The light flickered, then died. She could still feel the air, warm and slow, pressing against her skin. Beneath it, a hum, low, resonant, like a voice praying just beneath hearing. Something brushed her ankle, then her wrist, and then, with terrifying gentleness, fingers touched her throat. She gasped, swatting at the air, but nothing was there. Only the echo of chanting. Ash before fire, fire before silence. Her mind reeled. Those were the words from her sleep paralysis, the monk's words. The chant grew louder, not from one direction, but from all around, walls, ceiling, ground. The ash in the altar bowl began to lift, spiraling upward in a slow, deliberate motion. Shapes formed within it, outlines of faces, mouths open, whispering the same refrain. She screamed, but no sound came. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying at the base of the Bodhi tree. The urn was gone. The candles had melted into the dirt. Her flashlight lay beside her, its glass cracked, still faintly glowing. Above her, the leaves rustled, for the first time all day. A wind had finally come, but it blew only around her. The rest of the forest remained still. She sat up slowly. Her clothes were coated in gray dust. Her skin smelled faintly of smoke. And on the ground beside her, pressed into the mud, were footprints, bare, black with ash, leading away from the tree. 9 of them. They stopped halfway across the clearing, as if whoever left them had simply vanished. By the time she found the trail back to the river, night had fallen again. Fireflies hovered like embers between the roots. Somewhere, far off, a bell tolled, once, then silence. Her body trembled from exhaustion, but her mind was sharp, almost painfully awake. She thought of the tooth in the bowl, the chanting, the blind figure pointing toward the ash. Return the ash. Her grandmother's voice echoed faintly in memory. Don't open the bell. But what if it had already been opened? What if the ritual had never ended, merely paused, waiting for her to finish it? She reached the riverbank and knelt to wash her hands. The water ran clear for a moment, then darkened, threads of gray swirling like smoke. When she looked up, she saw her reflection, and behind her reflection, just for a moment, a monk standing among the trees, head bowed, eyes hidden by cloth. He lifted one hand slowly and touched his chest right where her burn mark was. Then he was gone. Only the still forest remained. No wind, no sound. Only the breath of something vast and ancient, waiting to be remembered. By morning, Janya no longer trusted time. The forest had not changed. The light remained dim even after the sun had risen. The leaves carried no dew. The birds did not sing. She had walked in what felt like circles for hours, following red string markers, her own footprints, the smell of incense that drifted without source. But there it was, at last. The forest opened without warning, and she found herself standing at the edge of a clearing, so still it felt held in breath. Beyond it, part devoured by vines, part swallowed by soil, stood the remnants of Wat Sangkhaen, the lost temple. The architecture was unmistakable. Narrow teakwood pillars blackened by time, stone reliefs of mythic guardians with broken arms and eyeless faces. The roof was half collapsed, the central bell tower leaning like a kneeling monk. Moss crawled across the stairs like a living veil. Yet everything was preserved in eerie silence, untouched by looters or time, as if something kept it sacred or warned others away. Janya stood at the threshold, heart pounding. This was not a ruin, it was a wound, still open. She stepped forward. The wooden floor creaked beneath her weight, and yet the sound felt swallowed the moment it was made. Inside the main prayer hall, candle sconces clung to cracked columns. Some still held melted wax. Others bore strings of dried jasmine, colorless and brittle. There were no statues, no icons, no offering bowls. The altar was empty. Only a single object remained at the center of the room, a bamboo mat, perfectly intact, laid in the position where a monk would sit in daily meditation. She approached it slowly. There were scorch marks on the wood beneath it, thin black rings as though the fire had once tried to spread outward, but was stopped, not extinguished, bound. She knelt, resting her fingers on the edge of the mat. The floor was strangely warm, not like sunlight or embers, but like breath, as if someone had only just risen from it. The silence deepened, and then she heard it. Footsteps behind her, soft, bare, slow. She turned. No one, only the open doorway, but the leaves outside were motionless, as if something stood just beyond the frame, unseen, watching. Her hand moved instinctively to her chest, to the faint circle-shaped burn that had begun to ache again, as if echoing the warmth from the floor. The temple was alive, not with people, but with memory. She rose and continued deeper. The corridor beyond the main hall led to private monk quarters, small cells divided by cracked wooden walls. Most were empty. Some held remnants of robes, prayer beads, torn books, all coated in a fine layer of gray dust. But one door stood closed. It bore 9 red strings tied across the handle, each knotted in the same way her grandmother had always tied bundles for ritual storage, each sealed with red wax stamped in the shape of a bell. She hesitated. The diary had mentioned it, the final entry. I have sealed it in the prayer bell beneath the Bodhi tree, but I fear it calls still. Was this where the monk had lived? Was this where he died? Her fingers brushed the strings. They were stiff, but not rotten, as though someone had tied them only weeks ago. She didn't open the door. Instead, she pressed her ear to it. At first, nothing. Then, so faint she thought she imagined it, the sound of chanting, not spoken, breathed, as if whispered through folded hands by someone not fully living. Outside, a breeze finally moved. The leaves rustled, but inside, the air remained still. She stepped back. One of the wax seals cracked without touch. A slow line split down its center like a wound. The smell that drifted out was neither rot nor incense. It was ash. She turned and left the corridor. Back in the main hall, she sat cross-legged on the bamboo mat, placing the diary before her. The pages trembled slightly under her fingers, though there was no wind. She flipped to a section she hadn't read yet, one that had always felt too dangerous to touch. On the 7th day of the 9th ash, the chanting entered my thoughts, not in sound, but in rhythm. I could not sleep. The bell rang even when no rope moved. I no longer eat, I no longer drink. I do not need to. The Spirit has accepted this place, but not forgiveness, not silence. It waits. Janya stared at the ink until the words blurred. The silence in the temple was no longer just absence, it was expectation, a stillness that leaned forward, that wanted. She spoke out loud, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you waiting for?" And somewhere far below, beneath the foundation, beyond the earth, she heard it again. "Return the ash." She stood. If the Spirit was bound here, if this was the place where the 9th ash had been hidden, then something still tethered it, something unfinished. She thought of the bell, the blindfolded Buddha, the clay urn buried beneath the Bodhi tree, and the bowl with the golden tooth. These were not offerings, they were anchors. One by one, someone had tried to bury the pieces of the ritual, the relics, the ash, the voice itself, across the forest, sealing them with red string and wax. But they had failed, because something still breathed here, and now it was calling her. As she turned to leave the hall, her foot struck something. She looked down. A single prayer bead, identical to the one she had carried, identical to the one she had found after the whisper, smooth, brown, faintly warm. She picked it up, and this time, beneath the light, she saw the carving more clearly. It was not a bell. It was an eye, open, watching, surrounded by flames. Her breath caught, and then, from the broken ceiling above, high, hollow, empty, a sound, faint, echoing. A single bell toll, then two, then three, then silence. Not from outside, from within the temple.
The bell no longer echoed. It hung in the silence, like a memory suspended in air, heard but not believed. Yanya stood motionless in the center of the ruined hall, the prayer bead clenched in her hand. She wasn't sure if the sound had come from above, below, or from somewhere inside her own body. But she knew what it meant. Something had acknowledged her. That evening she returned to the bamboo mat. The red sky outside bled through the broken temple walls, casting long shadows that clung to the floor like wet cloth. The diary lay open beside her, its pages fluttering despite the stillness of the air. She turned to the section she had skipped before. The ink here was smudged, as if the monk's hand had trembled while writing. The text was framed with hand-drawn sigils, circles within circles, each pierced by a flame-shaped line. And then the title, centered in black ink that hadn't faded, The 9th Ash Ritual. She read, "To burn the body is not to free the soul. Some flames cleanse, others bind. When the vengeful dead refuse release and the final rites fail, there is only one path, the 9th ash. It is a prayer of 9 breaths, one for each element of the spirit. Each ash must be collected in silence, each sealed in wax, each bound by red string. But the 9th must be entombed alive in prayer." Yanya's skin prickled. The 9th ash is not a thing. It is a voice, the final breath of one who dies with vengeance still burning. If not silenced by fire, it lingers. It waits for a body, a name, a mouth to return through. A note in the margin, scribbled in different handwriting, caught her attention. "Do not chant aloud. The voice listens." She turned the page. A hand-drawn diagram spread across both sheets, an altar surrounded by 9 clay bowls, each labeled in Pali with a different concept: anger, betrayal, shame, hunger, silence, fire, loss, name, and breath. Yanya stared at the final bowl. Breath. The instruction was simple. Seal the 9th before the wind rises. What wind?
Her breath slowed as realization dawned. Each relic she had encountered, each sealed object, had been a step in the ritual, a piece of the broken rite. The tooth in the bowl, the ash beneath the altar, the urn near the Bodhi tree, they were not random. They were ashes. The first 8, which meant the 9th, still remained. Or worse, it had never been sealed. She remembered the figure in the underground tunnel, the monk with no eyes, the one who pointed at the altar but never spoke. Maybe he couldn't, because the breath had never been offered. That night, Yanya stayed inside the temple. She lit no fire, she whispered no prayer. Instead, she placed the diary on the mat before her and closed her eyes. The air around her pulsed, like the earth itself was breathing in slow, heavy rhythm. And in the darkness behind her eyes, images formed. 9 monks kneeling in a circle, heads shaved, robes white as bone. One stood in the center, holding a small clay urn filled with ash. His lips moved, but no sound escaped. He began to chant. The others followed. Each word was a breath, each breath a prayer, each prayer a binding. Until the 9th, the final monk opened his mouth and screamed. Yanya awoke with a gasp, throat dry, heart hammering. Her skin was damp with sweat. The shadows of the ruined hall pressed close around her, but she was not alone. A figure stood in the corner of the room, still, wrapped in burnt cloth, eyes covered. The air around him shimmered faintly, as if heat rose from within. She couldn't move. She couldn't look away. He raised one hand and pointed, not at her, but at the floor, at a place just beside the bamboo mat. She followed his gesture and saw it. A small clay bowl half buried beneath the floorboards, as if the temple itself had hidden it away. Her hands moved on instinct, brushing the dirt aside. The bowl was intact, but it was empty. No ash, no wax, no seal, only a faint symbol carved in the clay. A mouth open in scream. The monk faded, dissolving like smoke into shadow. The silence returned, but this time it was not stillness. It was hunger. Yanya knelt beside the bowl. Her fingers traced the rim, felt the uneven curve where it had cracked long ago and been repaired. Something was missing. Not just the ash. Something within her. The mark on her chest burned, the circle, the ember, it pulsed like a heartbeat. She understood. The 9th ash hadn't been forgotten. It had been transferred, carried forward by blood. Her grandmother, her father, now her. The 9th ash was not in the bowl. It was in her breath. She opened the diary again. Near the end, a final entry waited, one she hadn't seen before, written in darker ink with furious slashes. I made a mistake. I tried to cleanse what could not be forgiven. He was no murderer. He was only angry, and I trapped him in silence. The 9th must be released before it finds a mouth. If you are reading this, do not speak his name. The page ended in a smudge of ash, as if the hand that wrote it had turned to dust. The air shifted. A breeze moved through the hall for the first time. Not from a window, not from a crack. It came upward, from below. The wind had risen. The final instruction returned to her mind. Seal the 9th before the wind rises. But now it was too late. The shadows in the temple trembled. Outside, the trees began to move, slowly, rhythmically, as if bowing in unison to something approaching. And from deep beneath the floorboards, the bell tolled again. Once, twice, 3 times. Then a 4th, a 5th, a 6th time. Yanya covered her ears. The 7th toll struck with such force that dust fell from the ceiling. The 8th rang hollow, like a breath drawn too fast. The 9th toll never came. Only silence. A held breath. Waiting. And then she heard it. A whisper, not from the temple, but from inside her chest. Let me speak.
Janya did not sleep. After the 8th bell toll, the silence stretched thin and sharp, like the breath held before a scream. She sat alone in the temple's ruined prayer hall, the clay bowl in her lap, the mark on her chest still pulsing beneath her shirt, hot, aching, and alive. The diary lay beside her like a wound. The 9th ash had never been sealed. It had been passed, and now it was asking to be spoken. Let me speak. The whisper lingered just below her heartbeat. It wasn't in her ears, it was inside her, a presence behind her breath, behind her thoughts, familiar and foreign, gentle and dreadful. She stood, her legs trembled. It was time to find the monk. The sealed door waited at the end of the corridor, its frame still bound by red string, though many of the wax seals had cracked overnight. The air smelled of warm earth and something older, like wood left to rot in prayer. Janya reached for the knots. One by one, she untied them, whispering no chant, offering no plea, just silence. As the last string fell to the floor, the door creaked open on its own. The room beyond was small, a monk's meditation cell. The walls were blackened by smoke, the ceiling cracked open to reveal the sky. But in the center of the floor sat the body, or what was left of it. A skeleton, legs crossed, hands folded in his lap, his spine unnaturally straight. His robes had half disintegrated, but the remaining threads clung like shadows. His skull was bowed, mouth open in a scream that never left bone. But it was the eyes that stole her breath. There were none, only empty sockets filled with ash. Janya fell to her knees. The figure had not died in violence. No, he had taken his own eyes, either as penance or to prevent something from being seen. She remembered the old woman in the village who had warned her, "He took his own eyes to keep from seeing the fire he called." Her hands trembled as she reached toward him. Something rested in his lap. A wax seal, broken in two, barely clinging to a fragment of red string. Beneath it what looked like a piece of brittle paper wrapped around a sliver of bone. She lifted it gently. The paper bore a symbol, one circle surrounded by 9 smaller circles, the 9th ash sigil. She opened the wrapping. Inside was a fingernail, charred but whole. It still radiated heat.
her vision swam. She saw flashes, a young monk kneeling under a Bodhi tree, a man brought before him in chains, eyes filled with rage, villagers chanting, the ritual beginning, the ash scattered. Then the prisoner broke the silence, spoke his true name, and in that moment the rite shattered. The monk screamed, the bell cracked. The spirit did not cross. Janya gasped as the vision ended. The ash had remained not because the monk failed, but because the soul he tried to purify refused release. The man was never a demon, but the ritual made him one. She looked again at the skeleton. There was no peace in it, not even in death. The bones were curled inward, tense, as if the body had died, still trying to hold something in, or someone. The spirit had never left. She lit incense from her pack, not in worship, but in mourning. She placed it at the skeleton's feet and bowed once. And in that moment, the ash in the eye sockets shifted, not from wind, from breath. A sigh filled the air, long, hollow, soft as regret. And then, I bound him. I failed. Janya froze. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It was not her own. It echoed inside her mind. You carry him now. You are the mouth. Tears pricked her eyes. Then what do I do? Silence. Then, complete the chant. Seal the name. Only silence can close the breath. She turned to leave, but as she stepped across the threshold, the ground beneath her shifted. Not cracked, not broke. It opened. She stumbled back as the earth split in a perfect circle inside the meditation cell. Beneath the floorboards, a pit had been carved, lined with old clay tiles, each etched with a different polyglyph. At the center, sealed in layers of melted red wax and string, was a clay amulet. It was shaped like a monk's head, mouth open, eyes sealed. Even from the distance, Janya could feel the heat radiating from it. The monk had tried to bind the spirit not in ash, but in an object, an amulet. The breath of the vengeful man, his final words, had been sealed in clay, hidden beneath the monk's own body, buried beneath wax and prayer and guilt. But the amulet was cracked, a hairline crack down the center of the mouth. And now, the breath inside had found her. Janya fell to her knees. She understood now. The ritual had been broken not by fire, but by speech. The spirit had spoken before the final breath could be offered. His voice had escaped, only partially, trapped mid-chant, bound but unfinished. And now it needed a body again, a mouth to finish the words that were never heard. She picked up the amulet. It pulsed in her hand, warm like blood, and from somewhere inside, a voice that was not the monk's, low, male, furious. I never asked to be saved. She dropped it in horror. The voice continued. They burned me to silence me, not to release me. He took my name and thought it was forgiveness, but he didn't ask what I wanted. Janya wept. It wasn't just a cursed object. It was a memory. A man with rage in his heart, a monk with hope in his own heart, and a ritual meant to heal that instead left the wound wide open. She turned to the skeleton again. Who was he? No answer. She turned to the amulet. Who were you? And finally, the voice said one word. Nam. Her mouth trembled. The moment she heard it, the mark on her chest seared with heat. Not pain, but recognition. Nam. The name that was never meant to be spoken. The spirit's final breath, released without cleansing. The ninth ash, now living inside her. She knew what came next. She had to complete the ritual. But to do that, she would have to give her own breath. Not speak his name again, but bury it, bind it, seal it with silence. Or else, he would rise again. As she left the cell, the amulet tucked beneath her cloth wrap, the wind outside finally shifted. Leaves rustled, the forest groaned. And for the first time since she arrived, the bell did not toll. Only her footsteps echoed. And somewhere behind her, the monk without eyes sat motionless, his bones turned forever toward the earth, waiting for the silence he never found.
The wind followed her. Not harsh, not cold, but constant. It slipped through the trees like breath through a hollow flute, curling around her ankles, brushing her back. And with every step Janya took away from the meditation sill, the wind grew stronger, whispering through leaves that had once stood silent. It was awake now. So was the forest. So was he. The amulet pulsed in her cloth bag, not like an object, but like a heart. Every few steps it grew warm, then cold, then warm again. Each rhythm matched her breath. It was no longer just a relic, it was bound to her, because it was unfinished, because the chant had never closed, because Nam, the spirit, was waiting for release. Not freedom, not revenge, just release. But where? Where had the monk meant for it to end? The diary offered a single clue. I sealed it beneath the bell, under the roots, where prayer cannot be heard, but silence is felt. The bell, not the cracked one in the temple, another. She returned to the place she had first found it, the Bodhi tree that bent like an old man's spine at the edge of the ravine. She climbed the path slowly, her feet dragging, the air thick and shimmering. There it stood, silent, towering, unmoving. The forest bell. Massive, bronze, tied with red ropes now long slack and brittle. It had once been suspended by a wooden scaffold, but the structure had collapsed years ago. The bell now sat on the ground, half buried in moss, its lower edge sunken into the dirt. Around it candles had melted into strange formations. Ash clung to the roots like vines. She walked to the bell and placed a hand against the cold metal. It vibrated, not like it had been struck, but like something within was humming, alive. She stepped behind it and dropped to her knees. The soil there was looser than the rest. She began to dig, bare hands against damp earth, nails cracking, knuckles bleeding. Every handful unearthed more black soil, and then a whisper of red string. She paused, brushed the dirt away carefully. A knot, then another. 9 red cords twisted around a wax disc, and beneath them, the top of a clay urn. She had found it, the burial vessel, the one meant to receive the amulet, the one the monk had never dared to use. Her hands trembled as she pulled the urn free. It was heavy, cold, covered in symbols, but the seal remained intact. She placed it beside her. Then she took out the amulet. Even wrapped in cloth, it radiated heat.
The moment she held it in her bare palm, she felt it, a breath drawn in. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred. The trees around her seemed to bow inward. And then, a voice. "This is not what I asked for." She froze. "Nam?" she whispered. "I didn't ask to be remembered this way. He wanted to make me clean, but I was never dirty. I was angry, but I was not evil." Tears burned in her eyes. "I know. He tried to silence me. He didn't ask if I was ready." "What do you want now?" Silence. Then, a breath, not to speak, but to end. She understood. He did not want vengeance. He wanted peace. And for that, he had to be heard, then let go. The ritual had failed because it never gave him voice, only silence, sealing without listening. But Janya was the last in the line. She was the breath. She was the silence. And she could finish it. She placed the amulet into the urn. It didn't resist. The warmth faded the moment it touched the clay, as if it knew, as if it had waited. She reached for the red string and tied it 9 times around the lid, whispering the chant the monk had written. Not aloud, in her mind. 1 breath for each ash, 1 silence for each sorrow. By the 9th knot, the wind had stilled. She pressed the wax seal, lit the edge with her candle, let it melt down the cord, sealing the urn in red. And then, without ceremony, without prayer, she buried it. She buried the amulet beneath the bell, beneath the soil, beneath the roots of the Bodhi tree, where even echoes could not reach. The earth welcomed it, soft, easy, final. When she pressed the last handful of dirt into place, the bell hummed once, low, quiet, like a final sigh. The forest exhaled. The pressure in the air lifted. The trees swayed naturally this time, and somewhere in the distance, a bird sang. The first sound she had heard from a living creature since arriving. She sat back, breathless, body shaking. It was done. Nam had been given his breath. His words had been heard, and in return, he gave her silence. Not the kind that presses in and crushes, but the kind that frees. She looked down at her chest. The burn mark, the circular scar, was fading. It no longer throbbed, no longer pulsed. It was just skin. The bell behind her remained still. The urn was buried. The amulet was sealed. The breath had ended. And for the first time in generations, the 9th ash no longer whispered. The earth was still. Janya sat beside the buried urn, her hands resting quietly in her lap. For the first time since she had stepped into the forest, she felt a strange lightness, like something inside her had loosened, like a knot quietly coming undone. The 9th ash had been sealed. The ritual had ended. But the story had not. Because Nam, the man whose voice once burned through bone and prayer, had never been cremated. And in this land, in these old, old woods, the uncremated do not fade. They linger. They wait. and sometimes they speak through those who carry their blood. Janya had never thought much about her family's history. Her grandmother, Mai Peng, had always been quiet about the past, raising her with herbal remedies, warnings about old trees, and silences that said more than any bedtime tale. Her father never spoke of ancestors. Her mother had disappeared when she was still a child. But now, the line was clear. Nam had not just been a stranger. He had been part of them. Not by name, by breath. Bound to the bloodline through the ritual gone wrong, sealed not in fire, but in inheritance. Passed from body to body, like a prayer no one wanted to say out loud. And it had started with Mai Peng. She opened the diary again. There, near the final pages, was a folded note she had missed, written in a different hand, less elegant, more hurried. It was addressed to no one, but she knew it had been meant for her. I tried to end it. I failed. They said burning would cleanse, but they never gave him peace. He was your grandfather, not by blood, by vow. The monk tried to take him away from me, said he could fix what was already broken. I said yes, but he never came back. So I carried the silence. I buried the chant. I gave the ash to the wind and told it never to return. But the wind does not forget, and the ash seeks its breath. Janya's hands trembled as she folded the page again. Nam had been a man with grief, rage, a past. Someone her grandmother had once loved. And when he died with that fire still burning in his soul, she had believed the ritual would save him. But all it did was trap him. She stared at the forest around her. The light through the trees had softened. Not bright, but warmer. Like the woods were waking up, not in fear, but in release. Still, something tugged at her. The ash was buried, but the body had never been found. She returned to the temple. The path felt different now, less ominous, more tired. The old stupas seemed smaller. The vines no longer whispered. The silence had changed. But the hall remained the same, cracked, leaning, shadowed. She walked past the altar, past the bamboo mat, through the corridor where the sealed cell had been. The skeleton still sat in its place, empty, folded, peaceful now. But it wasn't Nam's body. That was clear now. The monk had sealed the breath, but the corpse, the vessel, had never been burned. She remembered the underground chamber, the one she had stumbled into beneath the Bodhi tree, the one where the ash first swirled. She hadn't searched it fully, not then, not when she was afraid. Now, she wasn't afraid, only curious, only called. The chamber had not changed. The candles had burned down. The altar was cold. The bowl was empty. But behind it, beyond the rotted support beams and crumbling tiles, Janya noticed something she hadn't before. A narrow break in the wall, half covered by collapsed earth. She crawled through it. Beyond lay a second room, smaller, darker, and filled with ash. The floor was coated in it, ankle-deep in places. Shapes rose from the dust, remnants of ritual, burned prayer scrolls, shattered offering bowls, a cracked gong. And at the far end, against the wall, a shape that turned her blood cold. a body, preserved by the dryness, bones held in place by folds of fabric hardened with soot, a rope still wrapped around one wrist, the mouth open in a final gasp, the eye sockets empty. But different from the monks, these were whole, not hollowed out by self-inflicted blindness, but blackened by smoke. And there, near the base of the spine, a piece of bone had been broken off. The missing piece, the one the monk had taken. Nam's body, hidden, abandoned, uncremated. Janya knelt beside him. She didn't speak. Words would only bind again. Instead, she took a handful of ash from the floor and pressed it gently over his heart. Then she removed the final candle from her bag, lit it, held it to the cloth, and let it burn. The fire caught slowly. No wind blew, no bell tolled, only the soft crackle of flame. Smoke rose in gentle spirals, wrapping the bones in light. As the fire grew, the air shimmered again, and from the wall behind her, a sound. Not a voice, a sigh, long, quiet, released. Janya stood. The fire would burn slow, but it would burn. The body would return to earth, and this time, with consent. As she left the chamber, she felt lighter. Her chest no longer throbbed. Her breath no longer echoed someone else's name. She had finished it, fully, not by force, by choice, by listening, and by letting go. Outside, the trees bent gently in the breeze, not as warning, as a blessing. And from somewhere deep in the forest, a bell tolled once more. But this time, it was not a summons. It was a farewell.
Curses are rarely loud. They do not announce themselves with thunder or screaming winds. They arrive as whispers, woven through breath. They hide in lullabies, in silence passed from grandmother to granddaughter, in the stories that were never told. And sometimes they live in you before you ever ask why. Janya left the temple grounds with ash beneath her fingernails and soot in her lungs. The flames behind her crackled low, feeding on a corpse that had waited decades for fire. Nam was gone now. She could feel it, not as an absence, but as a quiet. Something that had once filled every breath, every dream, every pause between her thoughts, was now still. But with that stillness came the return of a different sound, memory, her own. She walked through the forest with no map, no guide. The strings were gone, the symbols had faded, the path had vanished, and yet she knew the way, because the forest no longer hid from her. It simply watched and let her pass. By the time she reached the edge of the tree line, the sky had turned pale gold. Her village rested below, quiet, cradled by the morning mist like a child wrapped in old cloth. She stepped into the field. Every leaf seemed to shiver as she passed. Every gust of wind tugged her backward, as if asking her to stay in the woods. But she kept walking, because now there were questions to ask. Her father stood outside their home, staring toward the forest. He did not look surprised to see her,
only tired. "You found it," he said. "I did." He nodded slowly. "And?" "He's gone now." Her father exhaled, like someone had been holding his lungs for him all these years. She approached quietly. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked. He looked away. "Because my mother told me never to speak of him." "Did you know who he was?" He was silent. "And then, he died before I was born, but he was connected to us." Mei Ping always carried something in her chest after that. Some people carry grief. She carried guilt. He sat down on the wooden steps, staring at the ground. He tried to burn it out, with prayer, with silence, with herbs and spells, but the ash stayed. "I think I was born with it in me, too." He looked at her. His eyes glistened. "That mark on your chest, I had one too when I was your age." Yanya pent. "It faded when I met your mother. For a while, I thought the curse was gone." He reached for her hand. "But when she died giving birth to you, I knew it had just changed shape." Yanya sat beside him. The breeze stirred. A rooster called in the distance. Children's laughter floated from somewhere down the road. And still, the past clung to them like smoke. "The curse wasn't in Nam," she said at last. He looked at her. "It was in the silence, in the unfinished ritual, in the pain no one was willing to name. That's what haunted us. That's what passed down." He nodded slowly. "They tried to trap vengeance in a bowl, but it seeped into the blood instead." Yanya pulled the diary from her satchel. "I'm going to burn this." Her father said nothing. She stood and walked to the old fire pit beside the house, placed the book inside, lit a match. The flame caught instantly, as though it had been waiting years for the chance. The pages curled, the ink bled, the cover cracked in half. The ninth ash, in its final written form, turned to smoke and vanished. That night she slept soundly for the first time in weeks. No whispers, no visions, no tolling bells. Only breath. Her own. But in the morning, she woke with a feeling she couldn't name. Not fear, not dread, just awareness. Something unfinished. A question. She wandered to her grandmother's old cabinet, where relics and dried herbs had once filled every drawer. Most of them were empty now. But one drawer stuck. She pried it open. Inside was a folded bundle of cloth, black, soft, worn with time. It smelled of sandalwood and faint smoke. She unwrapped it. Inside was a small amulet. Not clay, not sealed, wood, delicate, carved with a symbol she had never seen before. Not the bell, not the circle. This was a tree, its roots twisted around a face. No mouth, just closed eyes. On the back, etched faintly in her grandmother's writing, the 10th. Yanya stared at it for a long time. 10th? She turned it over. The wood felt warm, alive. And then just for a moment, a whisper. Not Nam's, not the monk's, but someone else's. Ash is never alone. Her breath caught. Because rituals, like curses, never truly end. They only wait for new names.
Morning light drifted through the wooden slats of Janya's home like strands of gold unraveling from the past. The smoke from the diary had long faded, but something hung in the air, a feeling that silence alone could no longer contain what had been uncovered. The 9th ash had been sealed. Nam had been released. But what of the rest? The generations who never knew they carried ash in their breath. Janya turned the carved wooden amulet in her hand. The tree, the face, the word her grandmother had etched so delicately on the back. The 10th. Not a warning, not a curse, but a message, a continuation, a door that no one had yet opened. She sat with her father on the bamboo steps. He had grown quiet since she returned, quieter than usual. He watched the sky the way monks study the edges of their thoughts, not searching for answers, only listening. "I thought it was over," Janya said softly. He didn't look at her. "Maybe it is." She opened her palm. The amulet lay between them, catching the soft light. "Then what's this?" He stared at it for a long time. "It wasn't just Nam. You know that now." She nodded. "There are others." She nodded again. He took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere far beneath his ribs. "I think the monk, Ajahn Narin, he tried to make peace in a world that didn't want it. He believed in ritual. He thought fire could erase the stain of vengeance. But some wounds don't want cleansing." He looked at her then. "They want to be seen." That afternoon, Janya walked to the village temple. The monks there were younger now, smiling novices, oblivious to the ash that once haunted these grounds. The abbot who spoke in half-truths before was nowhere to be found. But she didn't come to ask permission. She came for the archives. The temple kept scrolls dating back 2 centuries, local family lineages, funeral records, forgotten chants. Dust cloaked everything. The air smelled of ink, oil, and dried lotus. She spent hours reading, flipping through pages that whispered stories of old men cremated without offerings, of children buried without names, of women who died in childbirth and were never sung into the next life. These were the unspoken. The 10th ash, she realized, wasn't a person. It was a pattern, a lineage of pain passed down not by intention, but by silence. Each family carrying a breath that was never theirs. Each name spoken over fires that tried to forget rather than remember. At dusk, she found it. A scroll with her family name, Bantum, written in calligraphy. Within it, an entry she had never seen. Puang Bantum, wife of Nam, interred without rite. No cremation. Cause of death, unknown. Janya's breath stilled. Her grandmother. Not Mei Fung, but her mother, her great-grandmother, the first, the one who had died unblessed, Nam's wife. The chant had been for him, but the pain had always been hers. She returned home in silence, lit no fire, said no prayer. She simply placed the amulet on her grandmother's old altar, beside a bowl of salt and a photo yellowed by time.
and she whispered one sentence into the quiet. "I see you now." The candle beside the altar flickered. Once, twice, then stilled. That night she dreamed of a woman in white standing beside the cracked bell. Her hair was long, her face blurred by tears, but her eyes, they were Janya's. She did not speak. She only placed her hand over Janya's heart, and the mark that had once burned with ash flickered with light instead. When she woke, her hands smelled faintly of jasmine. The amulet was gone. Only the empty cloth remained. She understood. The 10th ash was not meant to be burned, not sealed, not buried. It was meant to be named, to be acknowledged, to be loved after death had taken everything else. And that, she realized, was atonement without fire. True rituals are not built from chants or incense. They are built from memory, from daughters who return, from silence broken not with noise, but with compassion, from someone willing to carry breath not as a burden, but as a bridge.
Fire had always been a boundary in Janya's life. It warmed meals, lit prayers, scorched away mold in monsoon season. But it had also stolen her mother's life in childbirth, her grandmother's voice in the ritual that failed, Nam's body in flames too long delayed. And now it stood once more before her, this time not as curse, but as invitation. A final, necessary fire. Janya stood at the edge of the old cremation ground near the temple. It hadn't been used in years. Most villagers now opted for monastery rites in town with modern burners and concrete urn vaults. But this place, this clearing of dry leaves and ash-packed earth, this had once been sacred and dangerous. They used to call it Lom Siang Jai, the breathless clearing. Because here, fire was not just for the body, it was for what the body carried. She dragged branches across the clearing in silence, building the pyre layer by layer, dry wood at the base, thicker logs in a crisscrossed crown, incense roots woven into the center. No one helped her. No one dared. The villagers watched from the tree line, faces half-shadowed, lips unmoving. They had heard things, whispers, bells tolling in the dark. Dreams where a man without eyes called their names. And they saw the girl walk into the forest and return different. Not possessed, not broken, just quieter, like someone who had come back from a room only the dead knew how to find. She laid the final piece atop the pyre, a woven cloth bundle stitched from her grandmother's robes. Inside she had placed the wooden amulet, the photo, a single fingernail she had found in the scroll chamber, charred but intact. The last piece of a spirit that had waited too long to be recognized. The villagers didn't ask whose remains were being burned. They knew, even if the records had never said his name. A monk stepped forward at sunset. Not the abbot, a younger one, silent, eyes wide, unsure. He held a long matchstick dipped in oil. Janya took it from him without words. She lit it on the old shrine torch behind her, held it to the pyre, and waited. It didn't catch at first. The fire flickered, hesitated, then bloomed, slowly, softly, like it was remembering how to burn.
The wind died. The air pressed in, thick with ash and anticipation. And then, a sound. Not a scream, not a cry. A low hum, deep, vibrating through the soil. Janya stepped back. The pyre blazed higher. The flame turned white at its center, pure, almost silent. And in the light, just above the wood, she saw them. Figures. 3. One with no eyes. One with a robe tied too tight. One with a face blurred by tears. They stood in the flame, but did not burn. They bowed their heads in unison and vanished. The fire snapped, cracked, collapsed inward. The wind returned, and the ashes rose not in chaos, but in choreography, spiraling upward into the canopy where red leaves drifted like tongues of memory. When the fire was gone, only a circle remained. No bones, no scent, just heat and peace. The villagers left one by one, without speaking. Not out of fear, but reverence. They knew what they'd seen, and what they hadn't. And they would never speak of it again, because some stories are not for the living to repeat. They are for the dead to finally let go. That night, Janya returned home. The mark on her chest had faded completely. No trace, no pain, just skin and silence. But not the old kind, not the cursed hush that followed every bell toll. This was a warm silence, the kind that settles into the walls of a house after forgiveness, the kind that makes room for sleep. She dreamed of nothing and woke in her own breath. Whole. Free. It began with the smell. Ash, wet, pungent, ancient, drifting through Yanya's window before dawn. She woke to it, sat upright in bed. The room was untouched, still, familiar, but the scent hovered like breath on her neck. Not smoke, not incense. It was him, Nam, and he had not gone. She walked barefoot to the altar. The amulet was gone. The cloth was gone. Only the photograph of her grandmother remained, its edges curled by heat. But something had been carved into the wood below it. Words that hadn't been there the night before. 4 characters, burned deep. We are not done. Her breath caught. The silence she had come to know, the gentle kind, the soft finality of release, was gone, replaced by a heavier stillness. Something had followed her back. Not the man, not Nam, but the ritual itself. It had tasted resolution, but not truth, and now it screamed through the only thing left open, her. The floor beneath her feet darkened, not by shadow, by ash. It seeped through the slats of wood, rose in threads, gathered at her ankles like smoke curling from a cracked bowl. Then she heard it, a chant, but reversed. Not in Pali, not in Thai, but in breath, in bone, in the language of the unburned. She stumbled backward, heart hammering. The walls began to sweat. The photo curled inward as if shielding itself. And then, from the altar, a scream. Sharp, guttural, made of no voice she recognized. But it came from inside her. She clutched her ribs, fell to her knees, and the room melted. She was no longer in her home. She was inside the temple again, but not as it had been, as it was before, whole, bright, but wrong, because it bled. The columns wept red wax, the bell rang without motion. Monks walked backwards in silence, mouths sewn shut. And at the center, sitting beneath the great Bodhi tree, was herself. But not her now, a younger her, hair shorter, shoulders softer, eyes wide with the kind of wonder that hadn't survived the last 2 weeks. The younger Yanya held the wooden amulet. She turned it slowly in her hands, then looked up, straight into Yanya's eyes, and smiled. The tree behind her caught fire. White flame, no smoke, no heat, only light. It roared upward, swallowing the bell, the roof, the monks, and then everything shattered into ash. Yanya fell backward into darkness and awoke, gasping. In her own home, hands gripping her chest, sweat soaking her spine. The photograph was gone. The altar was bare. And the walls? They were covered in handprints, all the same size, pressed in ash. 9 of them, and a single phrase drawn above the door. You sealed him, but who sealed you? She wept then, not in fear, but in understanding, because the 9th ash had been one spirit, one breath, one name. But the ritual had left scars on everyone who tried to use it. Nam, the monk, her grandmother, even her. Each had carried the burden. Each had thought they were ending something, when really they were holding it, containing it, funneling it forward, believing they had control. But rituals aren't walls, they're mirrors. She gathered her things. The diary was gone, the amulet buried, but the carvings on her altar, the dreams, the heat in her chest, they remained. Because sealing a spirit doesn't erase the silence left behind, it only covers it. And now, that silence wanted to speak. She walked into the woods again, not to find something, but to offer herself as the final page. If the ritual had passed through blood, then she would be the last. She would not bind, she would not chant, she would listen until the ash finished its scream. She returned to the pyre site. The earth still held the shape of fire. She sat in its center, closed her eyes, and whispered, I'm here. The wind rose, not harsh, but fast, urgent. It tore through the trees, whipping leaves from their branches, and with it came voices, so many, too many. Nam, the monk, her grandmother, others she had never known, all of them crying out, singing, begging, releasing, screaming. And then, suddenly, silence, pure, final. When Yanya opened her eyes, the sun had risen, the wind had stopped, and her skin was dusted in gray. Ash. The last ash. Not cursed, not vengeful, just complete. The scream had ended, and peace had finally learned how to speak.
The village had gone quiet, not in fear, but in relief. as if something woven into the soil had finally loosened its grip, releasing the fields from shadow, the winds from restraint, and the people from watching what they never dared name. They didn't speak of it aloud, but they knew. They felt it in their bones. Something old had ended, and something older had been allowed to rest. Janya did not return to the house. She didn't need to. She had packed only what mattered: a satchel with salt, a cloth-wrapped string of prayer beads, and a single photograph of her grandmother, now scorched gently along the edges. Her feet knew the path, not the forest trail, not the temple steps, but the winding stone path that led up the hillside, just beyond the cremation ground, where trees bent like they were listening to the past. And at the top, where roots cracked the earth open like ribs, was the bell. No one had touched it since she buried the urn. No one dared. It sat beneath the canopy of the old Bodhi tree, moss growing up its side, vines coiled like offerings, but it was no longer heavy with silence. Now it simply waited. Janya stood before it, her bare feet planted in the earth. The sky above was pale, cloudy, humming with the weight of summer heat. She looked at the bell, then at her own hands. There was no mark, no scar, but there was a feeling in her chest. Still, full, not haunted, whole. She reached forward, not to strike it, not to summon, just to touch. Her fingers pressed gently to the cold bronze surface, and from deep inside the metal, too deep to be wind, the bell tolled. Once, just once, a low, clear note that rolled through the hillside, brushing across the village rooftops, passing into the forest like breath into a sleeping body. It did not echo. It settled. And every bird, every leaf, every blade of grass seemed to bow, not in fear, but in witness. She sat beneath the bell, leaning her back against the tree. The roots curved around her like ribs of something ancient and protective. She closed her eyes and listened to the quiet that was no longer cursed, to the silence that no longer waited to scream, to the breath that belonged only to her now. Sometimes the past doesn't let go because it was never seen, and sometimes seeing it, truly, deeply, without turning away, is enough to set it free. That was the truth of the ninth ash, not the ritual, not the fear, but the burden of memory carried in the blood of those who weren't given the chance to grieve, to name, to finish the story. Now it was finished. Nam was gone. The monk had fallen silent. The ash had cooled, and the bell had rung not in warning, but in blessing. Janya never left the hillside. She tended the tree, swept the earth around the bell, left rice and salt for passing spirits. The villagers called her Me Niramai, Mother of the Quiet Place. They didn't speak to her much, but sometimes, late at night, they swore they heard chanting from the tree line. Soft, peaceful, like a lullaby offered not to the living, but to the dead who had finally learned how to sleep. And once every year, on the same day, just as the sun slipped beneath the mountains, the bell tolled. Only once. No one touched it. No one dared. They simply stopped, bowed their heads, and remembered.